Good afternoon, everyone. I am so excited to welcome everyone to the Congressional Black Caucus 49th Black Caucus Foundation's ALC, and so excited to be able to be hosting, along with my wonderful co-moderator, Natishi Taifa, Why We Can't Wait, HR 40 Reparations. Dynamic, provocative, important members of this panelist have in their own way advocated for change in America, and I'm delighted that they will be here. And as I present them, we want to make sure that we hear every single one. So we ask all of my panelists to be able to attend to their remarks such that we will be able to hear everyone, and as well hear all of the Q&A that will be so very important. Why are we here? The answer is why we can't wait. HR 40, the commission to study and develop reparation proposals. I just want to take a moment to honor two distinguished gentlemen who, because of their work, we are here today. First, the Honorable John Conyers, who serves as the Dean of the United States Congress. Don Conyers introduced this legislation. We're so grateful for his service and his life. We thank his family for sharing his great knowledge with us. And then, of course, Dr. Ron Daniels, the visionary, the head of the National African American Reparations Commission, whose shoulders we stand on, who worked alongside of John Conyers. We thank them both very much for the journey we are now taking. After a period of unity over the last decade, we have come to a point where we recognize that there has been a backlash of racism and intolerance. What better time than to have a comprehensive review of race in America? That is what the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals is all about. Restoration and preparation. We realize that we must take a knowledgeable stand about the history of the descendants of enslaved Africans. Those very hardy souls came to this nation in 1619, and in this year, we've been here 401 years. We have in essence built the nation. The halls of Congress that I walk through are built by slaves. The White House, built by slaves. Slavery, however, is America's original sin, and the country has yet to atone for the atrocities visited upon generations of enslaved Africans and their descendants. Moreover, the mythology built around the Civil War has obscured the discussion of what happened to the descendants of enslaved Africans. The idea that there was an Emancipation Proclamation 2 years later, there was the announcement by General Granger on the shores of Galveston, Texas. 2 extra years individuals waited. And then, of course, there is a myth that why should I be concerned about reparations? Didn't they get compensation? And many of us know that the good intentions of General Sherman, 40 acres and a mule, the good intentions of President Abraham Lincoln, who died, none of those came to fruition. We saw our journey go into the 20th century, the 19th century, now the 21st century. Isn't it interesting that over the last week, we saw young men stand on a football field with all of their heart, unified from different backgrounds, unified and standing there, acknowledging to America, we want to be better. We want to be unified with all people. Tragically, through this whole era of white supremacy, somebody thought in the stands that it was important to boo. Well, today we're going to celebrate. We're going to celebrate the idea that we can come together around curing the original sin, come together around passing this legislation introduced by the Honorable John Conyers way in 1989. Now in 2020, we're going to be the problem solvers. We're going to acknowledge the fundamental purpose of HR 40, a governmental commission with academic scholars to address head-on this question of the destiny of enslaved Africans and their descendants. And so it is very important. Our message today is that we're moving forward. And let me just say to all of my colleagues in the United States Congress, over 150 from all walks of life, from all regions of the United States, are co-sponsors of HR 40. Today, on this moment where we have the opportunity to pass this legislation, we'll hear from these dynamic persons who their lives represent restoration and reparation. And so I'm delighted to be able to introduce someone who has had 45 years of battling and fighting for this question of restoration and repair. That is Nkechi Taifa. And she is, of course, an outstanding leader, president and CEO of the Taifa Group, a social enterprise from whose mission is to advance justice. She's an attorney, an activist, an advocate, and an author. I call her a friend of HR 40, who has not stood silently by, but has stood up, and she has been heard. I'm delighted to have her as my co-moderator. Thank you so very much. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so very much, Congresswoman. There is a critical urgency in the air. We cannot wait. There is an urgency because the U.S. government has yet to take responsibility for its blatant role in the enslavement era, the unfathomable horrors inflicted upon our beings, for laws, policies, and practices that evolved into the peonage system, the chain gangs, the sharecropping, the redlining, into the health, wealth, and educational apartheid type inequities, the mass incarceration, and the terrorism against African descendant people throughout the centuries. We cannot wait. There is an urgency because the denial of self-determination, the flagrant cultural degradation, the transgenerational trauma embedded in our genes, we cannot wait. There is an urgency because the role that governments, corporations, industries, religious and educational institutions, private estates, and other entities played in supporting the enslavement and its many, many, many vestiges or roles that can no longer be ignored, summarily dismissed, or swept under the rug. We cannot wait. We must open up that casket. The time is past due that the injury be recognized and examined, discussed, and redressed. Thank you, HR 40, for being the vehicle by which to have a public policy conversation about this issue in the Congress of the United States. Thank you, Congresswoman Shirley Jackson Lee, for your steadfastness. Thank you, everyone who was part of this convening today, for being part of the process of bringing victory to fruition. Despite the rise and resurfacing of white terrorism in the United States, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I am inspired by the reemergence of the spirits of Belinda Royal and Callie House and Isaiah Dickinson, Queen Mother Moore and Dr. Mario Bedelli, as well as the resilience of Reparations Ray Jenkins, who kept that fire alive in the spirit of Congressman John Conyers in introducing HR 40 year after year. I am inspired that under the aegis of Congresswoman Shirley Jackson Lee, HR 40 has evolved from a study bill to include the long overdue consideration of remedy. The harm was multifaceted, and thus the remedy must be comprehensive as well. Indeed, the forms of reparatory justice must be such as to improve the lives of Black people in the United States for future generations to come, to foster complete economic, social, and political parity, and for those who wish to allow for the full spectrum of self-determination options that were denied to us. We cannot wait. I'm inspired because for the first time in history, there is now a Senate companion bill to HR 40. And finally, I am inspired by the words of the great anti-enslavement orator Frederick Douglass, who eloquently instructed that power concedes nothing without a demand. Well, the demand has been vociferously made, and the time to seriously consider reparations has finally come. HR 40 is that demand to begin the urgent process of repair that is critical towards making amends for a shameful and terroristic error in U.S. history. We cannot wait. Reparations now. Back to you, Congresswoman.
I'm inspired. I see there's a lot of folk that are inspired, and now we will be inspired by my dear friend and colleague, the Honorable Congresswoman Barbara Lee from the 13th Congressional District in California. And certainly, I first of all want to give her my best wishes as we stand with her and those in California suffering from the wildfires. We'll work together in Washington for her. But she is a glass seal breaker, if you will, born in El Paso, Texas. She comes from a father that served as a veteran in 2 wars, and her mother broke many glass ceilings and racial barriers. We know her in 2001, where she led this nation in opposition to the war in Afghanistan. But more importantly, we know her work. She has long advocated for legislative action to end poverty, and we've stood alongside of her great work, as well as her work as our liaison to the United States, the United Nations. Let me also say that together, Congresswoman Barbara Lee and myself have worked on reparations, restoration, and repair and reconciliation. I thank you, Congresswoman Barbara Lee.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Jackson Lee. Let me just first thank you, first of all, for your lifelong work on behalf of racial justice and equity, but also as being a senior member of the Judiciary Committee, for making sure that working with our organizations. Nikisha, thank you so much for that sermon, that spirited sermon. And Dr. Ron Daniels and our beloved Congressman John Conyers, thank you, Congresswoman Jackson Lee, for using your position on that Judiciary Committee to really further the cause of African Americans and reparations and repairing the damage, which without your leadership, I don't think we would be this far in the process with 150 co-sponsors. So we can't wait. We're going to get this done soon. And your leadership and your tenacity and your commitment really speaks volumes to this moment where we are. You know, in this moment, after 401 years after the first enslaved Africans were brought to these shores, brutalized, dehumanized, and yet built this country under the horrific legal institution of slavery today, and recognizing today is 9/11, where, you know, we lost so many in wars throughout the world with African Americans serving in these wars. We have to just say it's time now to repair the damage, and that we can't wait. So much blood has been spilled for this country under such dire, horrific, inhumane circumstances, and we have done everything this country is required, and yet still have not had this government repair the damage of the last 401 years. And and I remember when Congressman Conyers introduced H.R. 40 in 1989, and this had to be, and he said this, the next front of our movement for racial justice and for racial equity. And I remember the California Party, Democratic Party, came forward with a resolution supporting H.R. 40 way back then in the early 90s. And so I'm so proud that now, and just let me call to your attention, the California Black Caucus, through the leadership of Assembly Member Weber, now has passed a resolution in our state of California to study and develop reparations for Black Californians. That's sitting on the governor's desk, and we're urging him to sign it. But it never would have happened had we not had the push and the foresight and the advocacy of Dr. Daniels and Nikisha and Congresswoman Jackson Lee and Congressman Conyers. So as someone from Texas and California, let me just say how important it is to say we can't wait no more. Are we going to wait for another generation? Generations of African Americans have been denied access to opportunity in every aspect of this country, whether it's policies, whether it's programs, whether it's funding priorities. Of course, systemic racism is part of the DNA of America, which reflects 401 years of the various forms of enslavement for the African American community. And I mean the various forms, from the Black codes, segregation, lynching, mass incarceration, denial of voting rights, just to mention a few. Now the deadly COVID-19 pandemic and brutal police murders now bringing to light through videos, through communication system. That tells us and tells the public that we're not going to wait any longer. So this truth-telling moment, and thank you, Congresswoman Jackson Lee, for supporting H.R. 100, which is a resolution to establish a Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Commission, which of course means that we're going to dismantle these systems of systemic racism and build a system based on truth, based on repairing the damage, based on eliminating the structural racist policies so embedded in the DNA of this country, and moving forward and passing H.R. 40 and reparations. And Congresswoman Jackson Lee, I'm confident we're going to do that this year. And so just thank you to all of our panelists who are with us today for their brilliant work, their insights, and their direction, because in many ways, you all have been guiding the framework and the development of the public support and understanding and clarity of the need for reparations now and why we can't wait. So thank you again for giving me a moment to be with you. I look forward to our panelists, and Sheila, just thank you so much for your support and for really honoring the legacy of our ancestors and Congressman Conyers in making sure that we build the support to get this passed soon. So thank you again.
Congresswoman Lee, thank you so very much for following into the drumbeat of this afternoon's message of why we can't wait. Tom Steyer has apparently understood that way before his commitment to join me and to advocate for HR 40, the commission to study and develop reparation proposals. I'm delighted to have him here and to make sure that he is well represented in his voice. First of all, he knows that we join fellow Californians along with his family as we express our concern for the wildfires. But let me just say that he believes in going directly to the people, raising their voices in a way to beat entrenched corporate interests, the same interests that have benefited, I would say, from the work of the descendants of enslaved Africans and as well enslaved Africans. We thank him for his work where he helped to close a massive corporate tax loophole to generate at least $1.7 billion for public schools. He speaks and he acts. Tom and his wife, Kat Taylor, have devoted countless hours of their time and donated tens of millions of dollars to advance charitable projects that advance education, energy, clean air, and water. Tom, we're delighted to have you this afternoon. Tom Steyer.
Well, I want to thank Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee for her leadership and for inviting me. It is an incredible honor for me to participate today. And I want to acknowledge the lifelong service of my friend, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, for her lifelong commitment to racial justice, for her incredible wisdom and her actually astounding courage. Reparations, the idea of repair and repayment for a wrong, must address the codification of slavery into our country's founding documents, must address Jim Crow, and must address the systemic racist policies that continue to exist across our country. That's why I'm so proud to support Representative Jackson Lee in building awareness for HR 40. This moment has been 400 years in the making. Structural racism stemming from slavery is baked into the foundation of our country and permeates all aspects of our society. It is a central part of our history, and it is a central part of our prosperity. That's why in this Black Lives Matter moment, when young people are demanding racial justice in the streets, we can't wait. This is the moment. The time for reparations is now. Representative Jackson Lee and other advocates are leading the movement. They have over 150 sponsors in the House, and my organization is directly supporting them as the critical thing that we're doing right now outside of our efforts specifically on the elections. This movement is about equity, about a direct conversation about race, about the debt the country owes to the descendants of enslaved Africans. But as we address racial justice and environmental justice and economic justice, this is not just a question for Black Americans. This is a central question for all Americans of all races. We must confront and deal with our history together, repair it as best we can together, if we're ever to move on together. I've long known that sweeping this under the rug yet again cannot work. That's why I made reparations a central part of my run for the presidency, and why I particularly move other white Americans to get behind the movement. If we're ever going to be the United States of America, if we're ever going to live up to our values, our deepest values about equality and freedom, then we must acknowledge our past in all its injustice, repair what we can, and create the equitable and United States of America, the future that we all yearn for. God bless us all.
God bless us all. Thank you so very much. We're now honored to be able to have the Honorable Ben Crump, who we are well aware of the outstanding legacy and leadership that he has given to hurting families across America that have found their way to a tragic circumstance with their family members. I know Ben Crump is standing by, and I believe that he's standing by with the family that I love and that I know, and that is a family of George Floyd, Houstonians who happen to be in Minneapolis, Minnesota. For them to take the time to join us today is enormous. Thank you, Ben Crump, former president of the National Bar Association, but I think if he'd want to be known as any definition or description, it is a man who wants to put himself out of business, but it is also a man that when the call comes, he does not discriminate. He runs to the aid of hurting families in order to bring justice to them and this nation. Ben Crump.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. I have the honor of standing in the Attorney General office, Keith Ellison, your former colleague, with the family members of George Floyd. We have Philonise Floyd, Rodney Floyd, and his sister Bridget Floyd. And before I make my comments, they just wanted to say a brief word to you and the congressional leadership.
On behalf of George Floyd family, we can no longer wait for justice. The time is now.
The time for change is now, and we can no longer wait.
I would like for them to do what is right. Whatever was seen from the world seeing this, they need to they need to pay for what they did.
And that's the perfect segue to talking about reparations, because while all the rest of America is dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, we in Black America are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic that represents the year the first enslaved Africans were brought to America. And for 401 years, we have been dealing with systematic racism and oppression. And I'm so very elated that the Congressional Black Caucus and the congressional leadership, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, is finally saying to America, pay what is due to us, because this systemic racism is continuing, whether it's killing of George Floyd with a knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the killing of Breonna Taylor in her own apartment from these racist, unconstitutional no-knock warrants, or the lynching of Ahmaud Arbery for jogging while black in Brunswick, Georgia, or just recently, the brutal, excessive use of force against Jacob Blake Jr., shot 7 times in the back in front of his 3 little boys sitting in the car. We have to deal with this issue of systemic racism that stems from when they first brought us over here on the slave ships. And right now is the time.
Thank you, Ben, very much. We know the work you're doing, Mr. Crump. To the family, our deepest sympathy, but most of all, our compassion to get the job done for you, both in George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, justice in the courts, and as well the passage of HR 40, the comprehensive look at race and repair and restoration in this nation. We wish you the best of your life as we do our job on your behalf. Thank you so very much. It is my privilege now to acknowledge the 42nd Mayor of Los Angeles, Mayor Eric Garcetti, who has been a strong advocate and partner for the passage of H.R. 40. We thank you very much. We will see a short video at this time.
Greetings from Los Angeles. I'm Mayor Eric Garcetti, and I'm honored to join Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee to take part in this year's Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's annual legislative conference. My hometown, the City of Angels, is so proud of its leaderships in the halls of Congress, with people like my own Congresswoman and CBC Chair, Karen Bass. Fearless crusaders for justice, like the Chair of the Financial Services Committee, Maxine Waters. And so many more, not to mention the remarkable champion for fairness and equity, who's now vying for an even bigger job, our Senator, Kamala Harris. All of us and all of you believe in a core goal and a core principle, that America should always be a place where equality is a birthright, where fairness is a foundation of opportunity, and a nation where everyone belongs. To realize that vision, we must not ignore our history. We must acknowledge it, learn from it, and act to right the wrongs of our past. That's why I'm such a big supporter of H.R. 40, a long overdue effort to shine a bright light not only on the original sin of slavery, but to study its effects and develop proposals to correct them. From here in LA and Louisville to Minneapolis and Kenosha and Rochester and beyond, our recent reckoning with racial injustice is only the latest reminder of centuries of pain endured by Black Americans, the vast gaps in wages and wealth experienced by Black workers and families, as well as the urgent need for all of us to reform public safety and reimagine the way we educate our kids and invest in our youth, the way we close disparities in health and wealth and housing, the way we create the same starting point for everyone in our economy, and yes, how we confront and finally take the actions to move conversations on reparations forward. H.R. 40 is only a beginning, but one that I am 100% behind. It is time for us not just to walk the walk, but to take the actions that will restore a nation's promise and finally allow us to be the more perfect union we say we want to be. Thank you, and have a great session.
Hello, I'm Greg Fisher, Mayor of Louisville and President of the United States Conference of Mayors. Thank you, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, for giving me the opportunity to speak about this important topic of reparations. It is well beyond time for all Americans to understand that the roots of America's economic prosperity today are directly tied to the institutions of slavery, Jim Crow laws, redlining, and restrictive racial covenants, all combined with other racist practices, contributed to this nation's extreme racial wealth gap. That's why I unequivocally support reparations for African Americans and ask everyone in America, specifically white Americans, to consider this matter closely and then voice your support for Representative Jackson Lee's and Senator Cory Booker's bills. That's precisely what the U.S. Conference of Mayors did this summer, passing a resolution supporting these important pieces of legislation. Mayors are committed to doing our part through local governments to disrupt systemic racism, which inhibits the realization of a nation of liberty, prosperity, and justice for all. We need these bills to be part of these efforts too, because they will help us get closer to a just America. And that is good for all Americans. Thank you.
Now it is my pleasure to as well bring to the fore the Reverend Mark A. Thompson, host of Make It Plain. Spent half of his life as a political activist in Washington, D.C. before relocating to New York City, the civil rights, political organizing advocate, and of course, worked in the 1984-1988 Jesse Jackson presidential campaigns. He moved to force presidential, the efforts of the Georgetown to divest from apartheid investments in South Africa. He continues to be an advocate, and he's one of the major forces for Reverend Al Sharpton's March on Washington just a few weeks ago that was so successful. Reverend Mark Thompson.
Thank you, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Clearly, John Conyers left a legacy by introducing H.R. 40 to Congress as consecutively as he did. And we should all commend you, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, for picking up the baton and keeping H.R. 40 alive in the way that you have. It's actually H.R. 40 2.0 now, because it's no longer a study bill, but a remedy bill. One of my mentors, the greatest political scientist of our generation, Dr. Ron Walters, once said, anyone working for our people must do so within the historical context of our ongoing liberation struggle. Passing H.R. 40 is a part of our people's ongoing liberation struggle. And there has been a long-standing historical context of our people demanding reparations in the form of land or payments or repatriation. From Paul Cuffey and an enslaved woman in Massachusetts named Belinda in the 1700s, to Martin R. Delaney, to Callie House, to Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, Marcus Garvey, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, and Dr. King, to Queen Mother Moore, to James Foreman at the Riverside Church, and to Reparations Ray, to the founding of NCOBRA and the Republic of New Africa, and the founding of the National African American Reparations Commission, and of course, to John Conyers' H.R. 40, first introduced in 1989, and to all the litigation and local legislation that we've seen over the years, including what's just happened in California, what Alderman Robin Sue Simmons is doing in Evanston. These are just a few of the milestones in the historical context of our ongoing reparation struggle. Our struggle with H.R. 40 is and must be a priority, and we cannot wait. We cannot wait. H.R. 40, once passed, will establish a commission that will debate all of the possible reparations remedy proposals, collective and individual. Some people only want to debate individual issues, but there's so many things that must be addressed systemically when it comes to our people, and this bill and this commission that this bill will establish will address that. It will also address the ongoing vestiges of slavery, the things that are still happening to us every day as vestiges of slavery. We can't wait because COVID-19 is harming Black people in the United States at 3 times the rate of white people. We can't wait because Black infants are more than twice as likely to die as white infants, making that disparity worse than it was in 1850 when we were enslaved. We can't wait when white households, heads of white households, who only have high school diplomas are sitting on almost 10 times more wealth than Black households, causing African Americans to be disproportionately denied mortgages and fair lending rates. We can't wait when the gap between Black and white wealth is as large as it was in 1968. We can't wait when school districts that serve higher populations of Black and brown students receive $23 billion less in funding. We can't wait when Black students are disproportionately punished and criminalized in their schools, unlike their white counterparts. We can't wait when we are suffering. The systemic racism causes post-traumatic stress disorder, post-traumatic slavery disorder, harm to our immune systems, premature aging. In Washington, D.C. alone, life expectancies of African Americans are almost 15 years shorter than white residents. We can't rate with the growing suicide rate for Black children. We can't rate when government infrastructure plans have racially segregated cities and continue to do so. We can't wait when we're disproportionately affected by environmental racism and environmental injustices. We can't wait when even dying costs Black people more. End-of-life care under Medicare is $7,100 more expensive for African Americans. We can't wait when we're more than 6 times as likely as white people to languish behind bars for possessing drugs for personal use, even though Black and white people use drugs at the same rate. 1 in 1,000 Black men and boys in the United States can expect to die at the hands of the police. That's why we can't wait. We can't wait when Black women in the United States are 3 times more likely to die of preventable pregnancy-related causes more likely than white women. Neither of these issues, including this ongoing police-demic running alongside the pandemic, neither of these ongoing vestiges of slavery discriminate against any African Americans, by the way, whether we can trace our lineage directly to enslaved ancestors or not. The police didn't ask Amadou Diallo whether or not his ancestors were enslaved. The white middle class was built thanks to the Homestead Act, the GI Bill, FHA and VA loans, and Social Security. We had none of that. So whatever we do, if we aren't talking about reparations, all solutions are piecemeal. We need the comprehensive, collective, and individual solutions that HR 40 will provide. And let's be clear, this is a piece of legislation that elected officials will have to pass and a president will have to sign. So anyone saying to us that they're in favor of reparations and at the same time saying to us we should not vote in 2020 specifically cannot truly be in favor of reparations. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, we're proud of the work you've done. This bill now has over 150 co-sponsors, and this has brought us closer to realizing reparations than ever before in our history. So everyone watching, please, ma'am, please, sir, please contact your member of Congress and ask her or him to co-sponsor HR 40, and also ask your senators to co-sponsor Senator Booker's companion reparations bill in the Senate. And hey, encourage city and state legislators to fight for local reparations too, like what's going on in Evanston and California and other cities and states and towns.
Thank you.
Congratulations to Congress, to you, Congresswoman, to NCOBRA, the National African American Reparations Commission, and all of you enlisted in this struggle. May God continue to bless us, and may our ancestors continue to guide us until the words of Oscar Brown Jr. come true, until we get our 40 acres and our mule. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you so very much. I know those who are just completely wedded to this session will now have their marching orders. Danny Glover. There's not a moment in art where Danny Glover's name was associated, from theater to documentaries to film, that I did not run toward that production when his name was associated with it. Here's a young man that was born to two parents, Carrie and James Glover, postal workers but civil rights activists in California. But he also, in his own right, has had decades of activism, philanthropic work, and charging America for being better than she is. He is, as well, has served as a Goodwill Ambassador for the United Nations Development Program, as well focused on issues of poverty, disease, economic development, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, as well as the UNICEF ambassador. I call him ambassador, and every time he calls, we stand up and answer. The Honorable Danny Glover, thank you for your commitment.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Sometimes it's beautiful, wonderful that the work I do allows me to shine in different ways and projecting the image of African Americans and Africans. But after listening to Reverend Mark Thomas, I don't know what to say. Because he said everything that I would want to say and more. And thank you so much, Senator. Thank you, Brother Rashad Robinson. We remember each other when you were part of the Youth League, or youth part of Trans-Africa Forum as well. I've had the honor to serve as the special Goodwill Ambassador for the Decade of African Descendants, 2015 to 2024, and had an opportunity to speak with members of the African descendant community around this hemisphere. We represent a significant part, although being generally out of 200 million people, relatively small percentage of African, but more power. What we do here with HR 40 impacts everything that happens in the hemisphere with African descendants, whether it's the 100 million African descendants and mixed race in Brazil, or whether it's the 12% of the population in Colombia. What we do at this moment is essential. We have to marshal all our energy of all our power, all our resources, and our voice as large as it can be in this moment. This moment is essential. It's, as the great James Baldwin said before, when we cannot tell ourselves the truth about the past, we become trapped in it. This country has been trapped in its past for 400 years, over 400 years. It's now time. We can't wait, because now is the time, now is the moment. As we look at the issues around African descendants here, and we say they mirror the issues around African descendants in the rest of the hemisphere, whether in the Caribbean or whether in Latin America, they were the same issues. What are the political projects that we're going to institute? What are the political projects that we're going to introduce that are going to allow us to begin the long march to remedy these issues that are the result of 400 years of slavery, of Jim Crow, of all the kinds of ways of discrimination that African Americans have experienced. So here we are right now. This moment is as those legs and bodies march in the street, provides us with even more urgency for this moment. And thank you for everyone who's on this call, so that we can discuss and continue to discuss and act. It's not about just discussing, it's action at this particular moment. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. What can you say about an icon? Danny Glover, whenever you speak, we are ready to stand and not only do that, but to follow you. Let me say to my wonderful panelists, we're going to do a round robin of our shortened time so that we can also get Q&A. I'm going to yield now to my wonderful co-moderator to introduce Rashad Robinson, and we're going to then follow in order as we had. Nakeshi, we thank you. Would you introduce? And then we'll go right back to where we were. I am just so inspired. I'm just overwhelmed with all that I'm learning today, and motivated to keep on moving. Thank you so very much. Will you introduce now?
Thank you so very much. Who in the United States has not heard of the organization Color of Change? And the reason why you know about that organization is because of its president. It's mover and shaker, Rashad Robinson. We're talking about someone who has brought the organization to over 1 million members, who has expanded the organization across the country and implemented many campaigns, which has served as social justice vehicles. So I'm not going to take much more time. I want him to have his opportunity to speak. And also, I think there's a question I will ask him at this time too about Color of Change and its formidable record of mobilizing constituencies to advance racial and social justice. And, you know, just why has your organization, Color of Change, chosen this moment to advocate for HR 40? So you can just put anything you wanted to say within that, because I know your time is short.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. It is such an honor to be in this conversation with so many incredible and inspiring leaders. I really appreciate that shout out from Danny Glover, who I met almost 20 years ago back when I could call myself a youth activist. And to Congresswoman Jackson Lee for your incredible and inspired leadership. To Congresswoman Barbara Lee, Color of Change was founded in Oakland. And we grew from a single email to about 1,000 people right after that telethon where Kanye West said, George Bush doesn't care about Black people. We actually had t-shirts made that said Kanye was right. And we can't wear those t-shirts anymore. But I say all that to say, we as an organization have now grown to over 7 million members around the country, Black folks and allies of every single race, is the largest online grassroots Black organization, social justice organization in the country. We recognize that we can't just have charitable solutions to structural problems, that we actually have to build the type of systemic and structural change, but we have to recognize that the problems that we're facing are not accidents. They are not car accidents, but they are manufactured, and they are based off of historic and structural things that have been done in this country. And all of the other speakers really talked about so many of the sort of issues that animate this conversation around reparations. And so what I wanna just spend my last minute saying is that as we continue to build the fight, to build the momentum, to invite more people into this effort, we won't just be supporting this particular legislation, but we will be doing the work to hold corporations and media and other institutions which continue to benefit from a set of rules and a set of contexts that were set up not for us to succeed and thrive. And so I'm hoping that as we continue just in our work to fight for social justice, that we can have a reparations framework to how we talk about the issues that we are facing. Black people are not less likely to get loans from the bank. Banks are less likely to give loans to Black people. That means we don't need financial literacy programs to help us do better inside of institutions which have kept us out. You know, Black people are not less likely to get jobs in the C-suites of corporations. Corporations are less likely to hire Black people for those jobs. And so we don't need mentorship and pipeline programs to help us do better inside of racist structures. We need those racist structures to change. Black communities are not vulnerable. Vulnerability is a personal trait. So let's not spend our time trying to fix Black people and our families, but let's dismantle the structures and the systems that have far too often held us back. Because at the end of the day, any group of people that have faced the sort of oppression, the targeting, the exploitation that Black people have faced and still come out with a sense of joy and focus on the future, is a community that should be invested in deeply. And so as part of this effort, whether it is our work out in the field on all of our work, we won't just be centering Black pain, but we will be centering Black joy. And Black joy is not the absence of pain, but the presence of aspiration. Not just what we are fighting against, but what we are fighting for, because Black people are the protagonists in the American story of democracy, the American story of voting, the American story of education. No group of people have fought harder, stood in longer lines, faced more indignities, faced more threats of violence in order to be able to express our will for a better future. And so what we are demanding and what we are fighting for is what is due to us. And that is what we will be doing at Color of Change, working at the policy level, but also working at the cultural level to build the type of systemic and cultural power that changes the rules. So thank you all for having me. Please join us at Color of Change over the next couple of weeks as we launch our petition and other exercises to bring people into that effort, because this is an opportunity where we can channel the presence of this moment, the visibility of this moment, into the power to actually change the rules. Thank you all very much.
We will certainly join your petition, but we will join your march. And that's what this session is all about, is to give everyone who has the privilege of being part of it, where do we go from here and why we can't wait. Thank you so very much. It's a privilege. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Kamau Bell. A picture is worth 1,000 words. And besides his stand-up comedy, he is a brilliant producer, executive producer, and director of a documentary, United Shades of America. I don't know where that title came from, but I am drawn to it every season. And he has presented to us pictures of our story. Brother Bell, as you speak to us and tell us about HR 40, the Commission to Study Reparations, and develop proposals, share with us the thinking of United Shades of America in the season this year, where you showed the inequities but the brilliance of the descendants of enslaved Africans. Mr. Bell.
Thank you, Congresswoman Lee. First of all, I'm not going to tell anybody on this call anything about HR 40. I'm sitting here taking notes, so thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. Honored to see all these people here who have been deep in the work, and I appreciate that as mostly a regular Black person walking around, not often in these August circles. So thank you for having me here. I think the job of United Shades of America is to mainstream conversations that a lot of Americans don't have access to or turn away from. So I think when we, throughout the series and throughout this season, we're really talking about how the system's not broken. The system was designed to keep Black folks at the bottom. And I think with CNN, with the fact it's on CNN, and as we all know, a lot of white folks watch CNN, a lot of white folks are hearing these discussions for the first time. And I think a big part of this work, as far as I see it, is there's a legislative battle, which you are all engaged in, and I'm happy to support. There's also the cultural battle, which I think I fight on United Shades of America, to get people to have access to a conversation like reparations who maybe never even heard the word or were afraid to hear the word. So for me, I see that the same way that I think Shonda Rhimes helped mainstream marriage equality through Grey's Anatomy. I think my job, not to compare myself to the greatness of Shonda Rhimes, is to mainstream conversations about how the system is broken. It's set up to keep Black folks at the bottom, and hopefully to fire up the imagination of people who don't normally have those conversations about what a new system would look like. And certainly that would be through the work of HR 40. And I'm gonna stop talking because there's way smarter people on this call than me. Thank you.
We're honored. We're absolutely honored. You gave us a lot. Thank you so very much. Nkechi, would you please introduce our outstanding economist that I've admired, and that is Dr. Julianne Malveaux.
Yes, I would be honored to. Julianne Malveaux has been described by Dr. Cornel West as the most iconoclastic, I just had to say that because I love that word, iconoclastic public intellectual in the country. Her contributions to issues of public dialogue on issues of race, culture, gender, and the economic impacts are shaping public opinion in 21st century America. She testified last year at the congressional hearing on reparations on HR 40. She has been an author, an academician. She was the 15th president of Bennett College for Women, the oldest historically a Black college for women. She's a fellow commissioner on the National African American Reparations Commission. And Dr. Malveaux, I'd like to, as you make your presentation, pose this question for you. I know that you've been working on a highly anticipated book on the seldom discussed issue of white economic envy and extracting wealth from Black families and communities. So just how important is the knowledge of this practice for making the case for reparations and HR 40? Dr. Malveaux. Unmute yourself, please.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction, and Congresswoman Jackson-Lee, thank you so much for your leadership here. It's been so long since Congressman Conyers introduced the legislation, and it's gone from having not even the whole Congressional Black Caucus co-sponsor it to now over 150 co-sponsors. So this is due, I think, largely to your focus, to that of folks like Cam Howard, and certainly our beloved founder, Dr. Ron Daniels, who basically has gathered us, convened us in the name of NARC. Now, Nkechi, the question you ask is a really important question from the perspective of how Black people were doing at the end of the Civil War. We began to accumulate. Black people had actually begun to narrow the wealth gap. In 1880, we had $1 for every 36 white dollars. By 1910, it was $1 for every 16 white dollars, narrowing the wealth gap. Now it's 1 to 10. So it took us another 100 years to just shave $3 off. The fact is that the reason we stopped making progress is because of Jim Crow laws, et cetera, simple white economic envy. White people could not stand to see Black people have anything. If a white man was walking and a Black man had a car, that white man wanted to know, why does this Black person have a car? When you look at Tulsa as an example, 1921, I've been going through the documents. The governor of Oklahoma actually appointed a commission and asked the commission, why did this massacre occur? Here was a response: too many N-words, and the word they did not use was N. Too many N-words have too much money. So therefore, because we had too much money, these folks decided that they could just tear up. Tulsa, Oklahoma was a place where we had everything we needed within the Black community. We built our own hospital because they wouldn't let us go to the hospital, built our own churches, built our own schools, and there was a Black man who was the first person in Tulsa to get a car, owned a dealership. Well, you know, that had to go. There was a Black couple who owned a theater. That had to go. So when the ruse, and I always call it the ruse, that white woman was violated, the ruse, when that occurred, Dick Rowland's 19-year-old young brother, shoeshine boy, Sarah Page, 17-year-old white girl, both of them orphans. When he touched her, a white man actually went out and said, Dick Rowland raped Sarah Page. The newspaper headline said, to lynch a Negro tonight, which is why I'm so happy to see Kamal Bell here, because really the media played such a negative role in perceptions of Black people, such a negative role that we have to look at the media and the way that they dealt with perceptions, the way that they lied, the way that they basically threw fire on what was going on. We can't even find everything from Tulsa. They've destroyed many of the newspapers. But here's the bottom line, Keisha, in terms of the question. The bottom line is that white economic envy constrained Black people. See, whenever Black people accumulated, that refuted the notion of Black inferiority. Whenever we accumulated, all bets were off in terms of white folks thinking that they were better than us. And so they literally systematically had to go through and make us worse. So the first lynching, and when I get out of time, I know one of y'all gonna tell me, the first lynching that that Ida B. Wells documented was a lynching that was the direct result of Black people having the nerve to compete with white people. So a brother named Tommy Moss started the People's Drugstore because the other drugstore was nasty. People were in there gambling, whatever. Black women didn't like going in there. And so this brother started a store. How dare they start a store? Two little boys got into a fight over marbles, and that turned into 3 Black men being lynched. So, you know, a lot of people want to tell the story about enslavement, and it's a very important story. We would not have a United States economy absent enslavement. And we have to make sure that we understand that. There would be no US economy, no bond market absent enslavement. However, at the end of enslavement, we were on our way to doing very well, except for white economic envy. And whether we're talking about Memphis, Tennessee, and the People's Store, whether we're talking about Wilmington, North Carolina, and the total evisceration of that community, or Tulsa, or we go down the line. Whenever, you know, people will tell you that lynching happened because Black men were lusting after white women. Lies. Lynching occurred because of economic envy. And people made these lies up about Black men and white women. But one of the most poignant stories going through Ida B. Wells stuff is a story about a consensual relationship between a Black man and a white woman. Bottom line, this woman was a widow. She had inherited property. Land again, economics again. So they busted into her house and found the two of them in bed together. She, of course, cried rape because she might have been lynched herself had she admitted a consensual relationship with a Black man. They tied the brother to a tree. They made her light the match. They made her light the match. And again, we often don't know that lynchings were accompanied with fire. People are often burnt alive. When she lit the match, the brother said to her, "Baby, would you do this to me after all I've been to you?" And that just, I was in the library and you could hear the sob coming out of me, just because like, huh? But that's what happened. And there's another story, I'm gonna stop because I have so many lynching stories and it's making me crazy. But there was another one where a brother owned an orange grove in Florida, insisted on going to vote. He didn't make it home. And they took the orange grove. And we could go down to the economic losses, make the case for reparations, not only for those individual families, but for our entire community, because Richard Wright has a great passage in Black Boy, which I'm not gonna read, but he basically says any lynching has an intimidating effect on Black people, that you're afraid that you could be lynched too. Even though there were just a certain number of lynchings, the threat of lynching prevented economic accumulation, prevented education, prevented people leaving the South, any lynching. So when you connect white economic envy to reparations, you can absolutely make a case. And again, I am grateful for the opportunity to be with friends and colleagues. And I'm grateful that we're finally having this conversation. This is a conversation that is long overdue. And we look at the economic gaps in our community, they are solely a function of evil. They're solely a function of evil, and those who resist evil basically deserve all recognition, Sheila, all recognition.
We're looking forward to that book. We want to put you out on the road. And for those who don't understand economics or the economy, to really hear the truth. As I yield to my good friend, Nakesha, to introduce Cam Howard, we want to make sure that you stay tuned, if you will, because Alderman Robin Rue Simmons is coming, Jeffrey Robinson, and we are knowing that we want to stay tuned for Nicole Hannah-Jones. So to all of my participants, we want to make sure that we hear all of our good friends. Thank you, Nakesha. You're going to introduce Cam Howard.
Yes, thank you so very much. It is my very pleasure to introduce the National Male Co-Chair of NCOBA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, Cam Howard. NCOBA is the premier mass-based organization of a coalition of organizations and individuals organized for the sole purpose of obtaining reparations for African descendants in the United States for the genocidal war against Africans that created the transatlantic slave trade, chattel slavery, Jim Crow, chattel slavery, continuing vestiges, also called the Mo'afa, and the list goes on. So I bring to you the co-chair of NCOBA, who's also a fellow commissioner on NARC, the National African American Reparations Commission, Brother Cam Howard.
Thank you, Sister Nkechi, and thank you, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee, for your tremendous leadership on HR 40. Also want to thank the 154 co-sponsors who have signed on to this bill and the 19 who have signed on to S-1083. And also want to thank in advance the many congresspersons who will offer spirited debate when this legislation reaches the House floor. I want to thank them in advance because we know we're going to need that debate to move this legislation forward. I want to talk briefly about what I consider why we can't wait, why we can't wait, the continued genocide, plunder, and apartheid that exists in our community. National polls have shown large increases among white Americans who are in favor of reparations. For Blacks, we have always known that reparations is the only public policy that can address the centuries of genocide, plunder, and apartheid crimes committed against our people. These acts, genocide, plunder, and apartheid, are not just actions of the past, they are happening now. The internal violence we're seeing in communities nationally is a result of patterns of policy that de-skilled and underemployed Black men, the result of the intentional dumping of drugs and assault weapons in our community, purposely criminalizing large sections of Black community, and decades of restricted cash flow into our communities are just a few of the practices leading to these conditions. In the case of plunder, Ta-Nehisi Coates first introduced and described the massive theft of our labor and the barbaric violence that accompanied it as plunder, some of what Julia Malveaux just explained. Post-enslavement and post-Jim Crow, we have suffered multi-periods of plunder, a multi-billion dollars from our community via intentional wealth extraction schemes. In Chicago alone, from 1950 to 1970, $4 billion was stolen via redlining and contract buying regulations. With the predatory lending scheme, where evidence was revealed, the crafters knew the loans would result in foreclosures, robbed the Black Americans of $200 billion nationwide, nearly 60% of our total wealth that it took us over 100 years to accumulate. According to a Federal Reserve System report, in many major cities, African Americans on average have a near zero net worth as a result of this post-Jim Crow plunder in our community. Finally, everywhere, and as you have heard by many speakers on this panel, we're hearing the words systemic racism, structural racism, systemic oppression, and talk of the many disparities that exist between Blacks and whites. Systemic oppression and social and economic separate realities are the key components of the international term apartheid. This is our factual reality. We do not live in apartheid-like conditions. We are experiencing modern day neo-apartheid, neo-Jim Crow. Like genocide and plunder, apartheid conditions are considered crimes against humanity. So why HR 40 now and why we can't wait? Because HR 40 is the only legislation. It is the only legislation that has the potential to address the past and the current manifestations of genocide, plunder, and apartheid that has plagued our community for 400 years and counting. Sister Nkechi, I'm going to turn it back over to you because I too want to hear the comments from the rest of our panel.
Thank you. I'm turning it to the Congresswoman.
Thank you all so very much. I can't thank you enough, Cam, for your storied commitment. Please, it should be acknowledged, Incroba has been steadfast. Thank you so very much. Now, a very steadfast elected official in Alderwoman Robin Ruth Simmons. She is a 22-year businesswoman. Maybe that's why she was able to commandeer in her first election opportunity as Alderwoman in the 5th Ward in Evanston, Illinois, a unbelievable accomplishment. And that is that she passed the nation's first reparations program, which will be funded by the first 10 million of adult use cannabis sales tax. And she's chairman of the Reparations Committee. It's my privilege to yield to her. We've had many opportunities to work together. Thank you so very much, Alderwoman Robin Ruth Simmons.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you so much for including me today. Thank you for your leadership. And as I sit on this panel, you should all know that in different ways, you've been my mentor. I've been studying you as I've been growing in this reparation movement. As a local elected, I serve hyper locally, and I have been paying very close attention to the needs of my neighbors in the 5th Ward of Evanston, which is the historically Black part of a pretty diverse community. And so now to learn more about HR 40, how I can support it, is so important to the work that's happening on a local level, because there's no amount of local support and benefit that can bridge the gap and get us the repair that we are due. It will need to happen at a local and a state level and at a federal level. So HR 40 now, we cannot wait for all the reasons that have been listed before me. But a little bit about what we're doing on a local level. I really came into office inexperienced enough to believe that doing more good equity and inclusion work would bridge the wealth gap and our health disparities, education gaps, and all the other racial gaps. And it was really in my first several months in my elected role as alderman that I realized the insanity of believing that more of the same would produce justice for our people. The more I learned of our history and political systems, it was clear that anything less than reparations is an inadequate policy response to the conditions and the disparities in our community. Anything less than that was not okay. There is a societal debt due from the crimes against our humanity, not just our greatest sin, but the crimes against our humanity, and redress will require participatory responses from everyone in our communities. The remedy includes compensation, but the goal is full repair. I serve in a beautifully diverse city that is absolutely segregated, and in the historically Black part of the community, I see all the disparities. We've had hundreds of proclamations and ceremony in support of the Black community. We have a mayoral appointed Equity Empowerment Commission. We lead with the equity lens for our budgeting and all of our policy making. And with that, yet and still, all of that effort, we still have a $46,000 household income divide between Black and white Evanston. We still have 13 years different in life expectancy. We still have a terrible education gap, and the disparities go on. 71% of the marijuana arrests in our city are Black residents, and we're only now 16% of the population. So reparations is what is needed, is what we've passed here in Evanston. And my hope is that cities across this nation will look to their damages, their community, and pass something appropriate for their cities as well. We had to do something radical. The oppression, the discrimination, Jim Crow impact, redlining, lynching was definitely radical, and we needed to do something just as radical. And reparations was the answer for us. And my goal and my commitment is full repair for my people in Evanston and beyond. HR 40 is necessary to complete this full repair. And so I'm in full support. Anything that I could do at a local level, to help. But my Congress people have already been contacted, and they informed me that they signed on early here in Illinois. But Reparation Now, we cannot wait. Thank you again for including me.
Reparation Now, we cannot wait. Let me introduce a renowned and widely known artist that we will hear from by video, and that is award-winning John Legend.
Hello, it's John Legend here. I want to thank you for hosting this hearing today. H.R. 40 is sponsored by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and it creates a commission for us to study the legacy of slavery and its impact on the African American community. It's time for us to understand slavery's compounding moral debts for our nation. Too many individuals, too many communities have been disadvantaged due to their family's history of arriving to this land or due to the color of their skin and their economic status. Too many families, including my own, have suffered for decades due to mass incarceration, the manifestation of modern-day slavery. The time is now to shed light on these shared truths, to enable healing through a national reckoning, and to embrace and uplift our common humanity. I'm glad the committee is having these discussions today, and I'm so grateful for the chance to join the conversation. I look forward to more progress, and I encourage everyone to support H.R. 40.
And now it is a pleasure to be able to have our outstanding closers. I mean, we wanted these, the legal arm, and we wanted this voice that everyone has been hearing, Jeffrey and Nicole. How do I say that? I want to thank Jeffrey Robinson and the ACLU for standing up, not only to everyone's legal need, vulnerable people in America, but to support H.R. 40. And we'd be interested in how you came to that conclusion. As soon as you finish, I'm jumping right in to Nicole Hannah-Jones, because we want to be able to close, but we want to be able to have everyone to be able to have their vital point. Jeffrey Robinson, thank you for your years of service and the legal lead of the ACLU and your work for those most vulnerable. Jeffrey Robinson.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And what I would say is that many people may not be aware that the ACLU actually rejected support of H.R. 40 in the early 2000s. And in 2019, a number of us inside the organization were advocating that we elevate our racial justice work. We had met Ron Daniels from NARC, we had met Cam Howard from NCOBRA, and led by their work and what they were doing, we went to the national board to ask for support of H.R. 40. The board meeting occurred on a Saturday. I was on a phone line because they were wanting me to be ready to answer any questions that the board had. I was nervous as this was going to be a big fight. And I was on the phone for about 10 minutes and our executive director came on the line and said, okay, it's done. And I was like, why was this so easy? And he said, in part because of the number of African Americans that have come into the ACLU and have been sometimes quietly, sometimes not so quietly, advocating that our organization needed to understand that H.R. 40 was the only way to address these issues. The last thing I'll say, Congresswoman, is that I have been a criminal defense lawyer since 1981. I came to the ACLU 5 years ago. And part of what I recognized is that we could fix every single problem in the criminal legal system. We could release virtually everyone from prison. And without the fixes that H.R. 40 is going to provide, we will fill those prisons up again as quickly as you can say jump. And so H.R. 40 is the only way to systemically address these problems as opposed to nibbling around the edges. And we have had a laboratory experiment of over a century of what happens if you nibble around the edges. This is not just reparations now. In my view, this is America's last best chance to fix this problem. Because if we roll back from where we are now, I don't know where we're rolling back to. The time is now for H.R. 40.
Absolutely powerful, and that is an appropriate lead. Thank you to the Deputy Director of the ACLU, appropriate lead to Nicole Hannah-Jones. Pulitzer Prize winning reporter covering racial injustice for New York Times Magazine, and the creator of the landmark of 1619 Project. I simply want to say this. I heard Nicole Hannah-Jones speak at the historic African American Museum of Culture and History. She, in essence, took the room, because this project would not have ever come to the forefront without her guidance, her confidence, and yes, her knowledge. Share with us this whole question, reparations, and it's weaving into one of the most prominent news forums in the nation and the world, the New York Times. Nicole, thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for having me. And I hate going last because everyone else has already said so many amazing things. So I'll be very brief. If you want to know my argument for reparations, just read the piece that I wrote for the New York Times Magazine called What is Owed. But if you read the 1619 Project from beginning to end, it is a clear argument that slavery is not just something from the past, but we are still living and struggling with that legacy. And just as we inherit wealth in this country, you also inherit your country's debt. As economist Sandy Darity says, delay does not eradicate the debt, and we have had a 150-year delay on the country paying that debt. Reparations are not merely about discrimination. Reparations are about addressing a crime against humanity and the duration of that crime, the breadth of that crime, and the codification of that crime across all of our legal and political institutions. The 13th Amendment, which eradicated slavery, empowered Congress to legislate to eliminate what it called the badges and incidents of slavery. The conditions of Black Americans are those badges of slavery. The fact that Black Americans are on the bottom of every indicator of well-being, the fact that to this day, the wealth gap between a white household with children and a Black household with children, Black people have 1 cent of wealth on the dollar of every white household with children. These are the badges of slavery. These only exist because this was a country that thought it was okay to buy and sell human beings in order to exploit their labor. And that is why the unfinished work of the civil rights movement is economic justice. So I would argue clearly that if we ever want to become the country of those majestic ideals, this country has to pay its debts. That's it.
Absolutely powerful. That's it, but absolutely powerful. And let me just say this as we close out. We're going to do this again. I believe with the likes of Mr. Bell and Nicole Hannah-Jones, we'll be able to be produced in places where the voices of the likes of all of those that we've had will be heard. In Cobra, NARC, Dr. Ron Daniels, a tribute to John Conyers, the recognition of the breadth and width of what we're doing in the Honorable Barbara Lee, Tom Steyer, Ben Crump, Mayor Eric Garcetti, Reverend Mark Thompson, John Legend, the iconic Danny Glover, Ambassador Danny Glover, Mr. Bell, Kama Bell, Rashad Robinson, Dr. Julianne Malveaux, Cam Howard, Alderman Robin Rue Simmons, Jeffrey Robinson, and Nicole Hannah-Jones. I don't think there's been a collection of this amount of weight, knowledge, and experience to educate the American public about reparations now and why we can't wait. To the lawyer, Jeffrey Robinson, the last best chance for America. Many of you see that I am sitting by or in the midst of the American flag. And I did that, one, because we're the United States Congress. We pledge allegiance to the flag every single day as the House opens and as the United States Senate opens. I have no shame in pledging allegiance because I know that the nation is who she is because of the original sin of the slaves who built this nation and now the descendants of enslaved Africans. There is no shame in our service to the United States military, no shame as educators, no shame as business persons, no shame as law enforcement, no shame as teachers, no shame as families, no shame as those who sacrifice their lives. who laid down their lives. No shame as activists. No shame as Black Lives Matter. No shame as those who walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. No shame as Dr. Martin Luther King. Why we can't wait. No shame for John Lewis, who spoke of the beloved community. And what I wanted this session of Why We Can't Wait was to take this message to the beloved community that includes so many of diverse backgrounds who may ask the question why. Then I may just cite Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy that said they asked the question why, and we ask the question why not. That is what this session is about. That is why we have come this far. That is why members of Congress and the Senate, House and Senate, from many different backgrounds have decided to co-sponsor H.R. 40 because they were listening to your voices. Let me thank my co-moderator, Natasha Taifa. Let me again mention the Honorable John Conyers, the Honorable Dr. Ron Daniels. Let me thank our special sponsors, F.R. Brooks and Hyundai, who knew that this was so important that they wanted to be involved in it. Thank you to Hyundai. And thank you to each and every one of you and to the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Annual Legislative Conference in the 49th year, and all of those who have spoken to make this time repeatable, to make this session sellable, marketable, and to make this commission through H.R. 40 a reality, to heal the nation, to comprehensively address the question, as I close, why a woman, Black woman in Washington, D.C. earns 59 cents on the dollar when a Caucasian woman earns 89 cents. This doesn't leave out brothers and young people and families. It just tells the story why we must go forward and why we can't wait. Thank you all so very, very much. God bless you. God bless the United States of America.